Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 226 of the Book Cougars, two middle-aged women on the hunt for a good read. I'm Emily.
And I'm Chris.
Happy New Year, everybody. We know we've already dropped one episode this year, and it was our top 10s with Russell. But buckle up your seatbelts, because this is our first episode where we get to go over our regular segments about what we've been reading and adventures we've been taking, and there's been a few.
There has been a few. It's been a pretty good start to the year, bookish-wise, I think.
It has, indeed. Once we both got well.
Yes, yes. And we want to give a big thank you to Patricia for being our first patron of the year. Thank you so much for joining our Patreon community.
We're so happy to have you.
And we want to thank everyone who is here listening right now. Whether you've been with us for a long time or if you're a newbie, we want to welcome you. We know sometimes at the beginning of the year, we tend to get a bump in people who are maybe deciding to try podcasts for the new year, or they were with family members over the holidays and somebody said, hey, these are the podcasts I listen to. So thank you for being here. We can't wait to share a wonderful year of reading with you.
And the first thing we want to do is remind people about our read-along theme for 2025, which is Ghost Stories. So excited about this. And our first quarter book is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson.
Yes, and that is just around the corner. Our conversation about that will be on February
16th, which is a Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Email us at bookcougars@gmail.com if you'd like to join that conversation. There's also an ongoing conversation on Goodreads, and the thread to get to that is in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you there.
Absolutely. We will link to everything.
And then we also have a companion read of Shirley Jackson, A Rather Haunted Life by Ruth Franklin. I have the paper copy. I also have already purchased the audiobook, which I'm looking forward to doing a hybrid read of. And that we're just doing as a companion. There's no date to read that or anything. Chris has read both The Haunting of Hill House and this biography and told me there's some spoilers in the biography. So I am planning to read the novel first.
I think that's a great idea. It is an evaluation of her work, or looking at her life and her work and what's going on. So spoiler alert on that.
Yes. Yeah.
But the chapters are really broken down really well. So if you're reading a novel by her, you can pick and choose where you want to read that biography, which is really a fantastic, detailed biography.
And then we also decided that we are going to do a companion/buddy read of a Penguin ghost story compilation.
Yes, this is 19 stories, and we thought, we're going to do this as a buddy read. We'd open it up to everyone else if you'd like to participate. We're going to, starting in February, read one short story and discuss it on an episode, but only the episodes that don't have a read-along discussion.
Yeah, and we don't expect you to know what those are. So we have put together a handy-dandy reading schedule. The official name of this is The Penguin Book of Ghost Stories, from Elizabeth Gaskell to Ambrose Bierce, selected by Michael Newton. And we will put a link to this in the show notes. The schedule is going to be listed on a Goodreads thread that is just like an open thread about ghost stories in general that we'd love to have you pipe in on. And then we're also going to make a document that we can email to you. So if you would like to see it, just email us at bookcougars@gmail.com and we'll send you a copy. We got together yesterday and looked at all of our episodes for the year and figured out the schedule for reading these 19 stories.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Now, these stories are more American, English, British in that tradition. But I do hope throughout the year to explore some international and traditional ghost stories from other parts of the world.
Yeah, there's so much to read. We also want to share our listener top 10-ish. Ish.
Yes.
With you.
I feel like we needed a big drum roll before that, because listeners are always excited to hear about this. We do our annual top 10 reads with our friend Russell. As Emily mentioned, that was our last episode. But we also ask listeners to share their top 10s of what they read. And without further ado, we are just going to list off actually the first 15 books because there were some ties.
Yes.
Yes.
And we're not going to say the authors' names, but the author name will be in the show notes if you want to look there for reference.
I don't think this is a big surprise, but number 1 was James. Then we have The God of the Woods, The Frozen River, The Women, Tell Me Everything, North Woods, Clear, Brotherless Night, Sipsworth, Go as a River, The Ministry of Time, My Friends, Sandwich, The Covenant of Water.
Really fun to see that some of them are new releases last year and some are backlist.
Yeah, and some of the other fun things to see on this list is looking at who are some of the authors where multiple books were listed. Louise Erdrich kind of topped the list this year. There were, I think, 3 books by her that multiple readers listed as favorites.
And then Richard Osman with his murder series. Each one of those books was listed, so he appeared 3 times.
Yes, and then Beverly Jenkins made it on the list. She was our first quarter read-along pick last year in our year of reading romance. Her book Indigo made several people's top 10 list. Edith Wharton was represented a couple times. S.A. Crosby, a newer thriller writer. For those of you who are not familiar, he writes really pulse-pounding kind of thrillers. And then I think a more quiet mystery writer who was on here multiple times is William Kent Kruger.
Yeah, I love his writing.
Yeah. So lots of great books mentioned and fantastic authors. Even Willa Cather and also Moby Dick made it.
Yes. Someone else had a year of Moby Dick. It wasn't just Chris.
Hey, it wasn't just me. There were 2 people that listed Moby Dick as a favorite read for 2024. So that's pretty cool.
And we were excited to see that Pat Conroy made the list as well, because he's a beloved author for both of us.
Yes.
So thank you, everyone, for participating. It is so fun to see. It really makes me grow my TBR, because there's always books on there that either I've never heard of or I'm reminded of by looking at your favorites. So thank you for participating.
Yes, and we'll put that list in the show notes so you can find that there. So, Emily, what are you currently reading?
I am reading a book that is so appropriate for the season. It's called Winter Swimming: The Nordic Way Towards a Healthier and Happier Life by Dr. Susanna Soberg. This book caught my eye at the library. It was on the news shelf, and it has this beautiful cover of someone swimming in the water. Their face is turned out into the ocean, and they've got a knit hat, like one of those pom-pom knit hats on, and they're just treading in water. And what I love about this book is the pictures. There are beautiful pictures on every page. It's a really well-made book. It's got heavy pages. And one of the fun facts that I enjoyed is there's a history section, and she talked about the oldest polar bear club in the United States is on Coney Island, and it was founded in 1903. And my grandfather lived in Brooklyn, and he used to swim in the water in the winter, so that gave me a good smile. So I'm enjoying the design of it and reading about it. She gives you lots of helpful hints about how to become a swimmer in the winter. And one of the things that was interesting is she talks about how it's easier when the air temperature and the water temperature are close. It's much easier to get into the water, which is why a lot of people find it difficult to be autumn cold water swimmers, because the air can still be warm, and so it feels so much harder to get in. What I'm not enjoying about it is that this was the product of her dissertation. So there's a lot of repetition of her interviewing people as they go for their first dip and say, like, wow, this is hard, it's cold. And I feel like that's getting a little bit old, but I am enjoying it and I'm almost done. Again, it's called Winter Swimming: The Nordic Way Towards a Healthier and Happier Life by Dr. Susanna Soberg.
That's great. Well, it has been so cold in Connecticut here that the cove that we live on has frozen, and you know, you have those great circular little icebergs floating every morning, and I just love the ice on the water.
I do too. And I have successfully had one winter plunge. It was right before the new year, I think. We hadn't had these icy days yet, but it was cold. But I have not gone out now that there's ice barges everywhere in the water. Yeah. But I did enjoy it. I do think it feels really good, and I would like to do it more.
Yeah, awesome. Well, the book that I'm currently reading is A New Home, Who'll Follow. This is by Caroline Kirkland, and it is an old book. It was originally published in, I think, 1837. It's about her adventures with her husband leaving New York to go homestead in Michigan, which at the time was the frontier. And they stop in Detroit at first, and then they head further west to try to develop a town. I mean, it's fascinating. And she has such a great sense of humor. I just got through the part where they had a log cabin initially built as their more framed house would be built that would have a proper kitchen and everything. They're getting their goods that are finally arriving, and she's unpacking, and she's like, oh, these things that I thought I couldn't do without back east here make absolutely no sense. Like, she had this delicately carved table, and one of the neighbors is like, well, that's some good kindling, So I'm about halfway through this. I'm doing it as a buddy read with Sigrid and really enjoying it. I read a little bit about her. I'm trying not to too much. I want to get through the book first. But Edgar Allan Poe attended her salons after, okay, spoiler alert, their town in Michigan didn't really make it. They moved back to New York. And she had a literary salon, and he would show up, and he actually considered her an important American writer of the time. So that's a fun connection.
The other book I'm reading is Night Side of the River, Ghost Stories by Jeanette Winterson. And thank you to Grove Atlantic for giving us this early arc that I'm reading from, but the book is available now. And this is a set of 13 short stories. They're separated into 4 categories: devices, places, people, and visitations. And the book has a fantastic introduction. Being that we're studying ghost stories this year, and I'm not someone who's had a lot of experience reading them, I found the introduction so helpful. One of the things that she talks about after she got through the history of the ghost story was where we stand now with death and ghosts and things like that. She's pointing out that with AI, that's all changing, the idea of what death actually is. So I thought I would just read this little section at the very end of the introduction. What it means to be alive will be more than biological. What it means to be dead will be a temporary condition. What about the meaning of ghost? It might be someone who chooses never to download into a physical self again. We will communicate with such entities via a BCI chip in the brain. It's the modern version of telepathy, a post-human visitation. What if AI becomes sentient? If artificial intelligence becomes alternative intelligence? Then we will be haunted by something new. Or is it new? It won't need a body. It will seem like the gods visiting the humans, just as they always did. It seems likely to me that disembodied entities will live and work alongside biological entities. Some of these entities will never have been humans. Some will be post-human. Death as we know it will be a thing of the past. So creepy. And she goes on about that a little bit, but I thought, wow, what an interesting perspective. And so the category that's first is devices. And I've read 2 of the short stories, and one was about a woman who's being haunted by her dead husband via an app on her cell phone. And then another one is similar, where the husband is coming back and they live in a condo, and because of how the condo is run, he's able to haunt her in various creepy ways that have to do with technology. It's so fascinating. She's a great writer. I'm both reading it and listening to the audiobook. It's really well done. Again, it's called Night Side of the River, Ghost Stories by Jeanette Winterson.
I'm reading probably one of my top anticipated books of 2025. It's the new Alice Henderson book. It's the 4th entry in her Alex Carter series. It's called The Vanishing Kind. This is coming out March 4th. And thank you to William Morrow and Nick Galley for an advanced reader copy. I love her book so much. This one is set in New Mexico and deals with jaguars and an archaeological dig and white supremacists.
Ooh.
It is a combination. So it's stressful. It's a suspense novel. I love the aspect that she takes. For those of you who don't know Alice Henderson, she's out in the field quite often tracking endangered species, looking for evidence of their existence in certain areas. And so these novels of hers have such a feeling of that you're in good hands, that you're hearing a story by somebody who knows what they're talking about. And it makes me think of Nevada Barr's series. And those novels each was set in a different national park. And Nevada Barr had been a park ranger. So you had that sense of authenticity. I'm about 25% in. It gave me nightmares last night.
Oh, no.
There's a lot of white supremacy in the news. So this is very timely. Great book so far. The Vanishing Kind by Alice Henderson. More to come on that when I finish it, obviously.
And she was a guest on a previous episode. We'll put a link to her episode in the show notes. I'm reading an arc of 3 Days in June by Ann Tyler. This book pubs on February 11th. Thank you to NetGalley and Knopf for the advanced reader copy. Ann Tyler is one of my go-to authors. I just love her writing so much. She is not a young woman, so I do worry that at some point there will be a final novel by Ann Tyler. This one opens at a school where Gail, who's 61 years old, finds out that she is being let go from her job. And she kind of thought she was going to be the opposite, promoted and be the head of the school. She goes home. It also happens to be the eve of her daughter's wedding. And then her ex-husband shows up at the door with a foster cat. Unbeknownst to her, her ex-husband's going to stay with her because their future son-in-law is extraordinarily allergic to cats. This is one thing that Ann Tyler does so well, is put people in situations together that wouldn't necessarily choose to be together or that you wouldn't expect to be together. It's a slim novel. It's only 176 pages. And so far, I'm 50% through. And because it's called 3 Days in June, I'm assuming it's going to take place over a course of 3 days over this wedding weekend. I'm not a huge fan of weddings. I have read some really great novels that revolve around them because they are such great fodder for fiction, right? So I'm enjoying her writing a lot. I don't love that she chose to make it about a wedding. That's all I'll say about it. Sometimes when I read sentences of hers, I have to just read it over again because she is so good. She's just such a great writer. Again, it's called 3 Days in June by Ann Tyler. Pre-order it now. It comes out in just a few weeks, February 11th.
I have not read anything by her yet, but I did buy one of her novels last year, and it is sitting on my little library card at home. That is like, this is what's coming up next. So,
do you know which one it is?
I don't remember.
Some of her novels just really have meant so much to me. And she's someone who I wouldn't mind going back and reading some of her backlist because I haven't read them all. She has a huge backlist. That's why I was wondering what you chose. You'll have to let me know.
I will.
It's not The Accidental Tourist, is it? That's one of her classics.
It might be.
Okay. Because that's one I think I do want to read. I'm not sure I ever read it. Ooh, la la. So, Chris, what did you just read?
Well, I like to start or end the year with a self-help, personal growth kind of book. And I chose Slow Productivity, The Lost Art of Accomplishment Without Burnout by Cal Newport. I have read/listened to several of his books. And the premise of this one, which just came out last year, it's his latest book, is to do fewer things, work at a natural pace, and obsess over quality. Who can argue with those three things, right? And again, this is all about trying to avoid burnout. And his audience is primarily knowledge workers. So it's a very specialized audience for the most part. I think anyone could get takeaways, though, from his books or his podcast on how you could apply some things to his life. But I think this book, and maybe it's just that I'm getting used to his work, some of it does seem a little repetitious. And some of the ideas, they're great ideas, but then the advice for applying things seems very general. But what I liked about this book was some of the examples that he used from people in history and their work. Galileo, Isaac Newton, Jane Austen, George O'Keeffe are just a few of the people that he mentioned. So I really enjoy that aspect of it. And I did peek in on some reviews because I was wondering, it's like, what did other people think of this? Because again, I was like, am I just kind of saturated with his work? And you know how writers, thinkers repeat themselves sometimes, not everybody. And some readers in reviews have taken him to task for confusing knowledge workers with creativity or creative work, which I thought was a really interesting point. Or they got frustrated with some of his contradictions. I'll just leave it at that. Cal Newport, I enjoy his work. I read this one the end of 2024 into 2025, and I read the audio, which he narrates. Again, Slow Productivity by Cal Newport.
I was listening to a podcast with two women, and it was a woman who was writing a self-help book, and they quoted a statistic that 93% of productivity books are written by men, and that their lives tend to be well supported.
Oh my God.
And so it really affects what they write about.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is, he is a professor now at Georgetown University, and he does come from a position of privilege and great support. He's also not neurodivergent. I mean, that's one of the big issues I have with a lot of self-help productivity books, is that they're written for people who are like some fantasy person who doesn't have any kind of struggle with time management or, you know, anything in that regard. But yeah, it's usually white men who write these kinds of books for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I too wanted to read a self-help book as my crossover into the new year. And I thought I had it all lined up. And then I had an experience right as the new year was dawning that made me realize I needed to revisit an old friend. And that old friend is Pema Chodron and her book, Getting Unstuck, Breaking Your Habitual Patterns and Encountering Naked Reality. This is probably the 10 millionth time I've listened to this book. She narrates. I have it on a special button on my phone that I can access with ease. It is so meaningful to me. The very first time I listened to it was the year I made my big move here to Guilford in 2015. And for those of you who don't know, Pema Chodron is now retired, but she had a wonderful run as a teacher at Gampo Abbey in Nova Scotia. She's an American-born Tibetan Buddhist teacher. She teaches meditation, and she has quite a few very successful books, including this one, which, like I said, is a go-to for me. And she introduces the concept of shenpa here. And that's a feeling when we get hooked by something. And then once you're hooked, that's when you have habits that come in to try to handle that feeling of discomfort, whether it's drinking or eating or being mean or whatever it is that you need to do, as she says, to scratch the itch. I just find it such a helpful book to be reminded that we all have these things that come up time and time again. And there are really good methods that she offers here for understanding it. And she's very clear that there's no right and wrong. It's not about right and wronging behaviors. It's about understanding them and understanding your reaction to them and where they come from. I cannot recommend this book highly enough. Again, it's called Getting Unstuck, Breaking Your Habitual Patterns and Encountering Naked Reality by Pema Chodron, and I highly, highly recommend the audiobook.
I love her work too. Yeah. Well, you know, I'm going to go off in a different order of what I plan to talk about. This book sounds in the same line, in the same vein. It's the Book of Shadow Work, Unlock the True You, the Must-Have Guide to Inner Healing and Authenticity. This is by Keela Shaheen. It just came out. I listened to an advanced listener copy from Libro FM, so thank you, Libro, for that. It's through Simon & Schuster. And I hadn't heard of this woman before. I love the idea of shadow work. You know, this is from Carl Jung's idea of the shadow archetype that we all have within us, and it's the stuff that we repress. It's the stuff that's below our ego. And it could be, quote, negative stuff or positive stuff, but it's things that we've repressed that can sabotage us or just keep us from living our most authentic life, right? I was just curious about what this book would have to say. Now, the author narrates the audiobook, and she has such a monotone voice. It doesn't go up or down. It's not an unpleasant voice, but it made it hard to listen. It really did. So I zoned out a lot. So I don't feel like I could give this book a great overview because of that. I often put it on my 10-minute timer or sometimes even my 5-minute timer because I know I would zone out or fall asleep. But The Atlantic has called her the self-help queen of TikTok. She had a self-published workbook about shadow work that took off with the TikTok crowd. So I think this is maybe for a younger generation too. I feel like I have familiarity with the idea of shadow work and Jung's work. So I don't know that it offered anything really excitingly new to me. But again, I could have been asleep.
We mean no shade to the author.
Not at all. Not at all. Because what I did listen to, I really enjoyed. So I think what I might do is get the book, check it out of the library, and just review it that way. Because I'm always up for a good self-help book. Again, that's The Book of Shadow Work by Keela Shaheen.
I mean, it just goes to show that you need a little bit of diversity in sound in order for your brain to process.
Right. And I think the thing, too, is like, I'm older. And I think a lot of the self-help stuff is geared towards a younger crowd in some ways who are just starting to realize that this is not working for me. I need some support or help or a different way of thinking about this situation. I don't mean to sound in any way like I know what's going on or what I'm doing, but I do have therapy and a lot of self-help tools that I use.
Yeah.
I'm looking for something maybe for older people and certainly neurodivergent people as well.
Yeah. Well, I finished a novel called Speak to Me of Home by Janine Cummins. We received an early advanced reader copy of this from Henry Holt. Thank you to them. And this comes out on May 13th. And reminder, we do try to let you know when the books we're talking about ahead of time are published. But it's also very helpful to the authors if you are interested in reading their book, if you pre-order the book, and also if you let your local library know about a book coming out that you would like them to have on their shelves. So Janine Cummins wrote the book American Dirt, and she was accused of cultural appropriation for that novel, and it became a big, huge kerfuffle. And we've talked about it on the podcast, and Oprah did many segments about it because she had chosen it as one of her books. So I am not going to rehash that here today. What I am going to talk about is this new novel. Janine Cummins is of Puerto Rican descent, so that is something that she really speaks to in this novel, and I think it's interesting that it's called Speak to Me of Home. Part of me wonders if this was her response to everything that happened to her with American Dirt. I have no idea. But it is about a woman that falls in love and marries a man that's Irish, and she is from Puerto Rico. They happen to meet somewhere else, but that is both of their background. They live in Puerto Rico for quite some time as a married couple, have 2 children, and then decide to move stateside to St. Louis, Missouri. The novel is told from multiple points of view and goes back to Puerto Rico many times with different characters, and also is in New Jersey and then New York City. I really enjoyed it. It's multi-generational. It goes deeply into family drama and all that involves, including secrets. I love a good family secret. I did find it's very long. It's almost 400 pages, and I felt like it dragged a little bit in the middle. But other than that, I really enjoyed it. The one thing that I wrote in my book journal was a family saga that crisscrosses the ocean, delivering family history, secrets, and revelations. That was the sentence I wrote in my book journal. So I highly recommend it if you love a good old-fashioned family drama told from multiple points of view. And again, it's called Speak to Me of Home by Janine Cummins. I don't think I mentioned that it starts in 2023 and then it goes back and forth in time quite a bit. But there is a very present day aspect to it. And then I think the farthest it goes back is the 60s, I think. Don't quote me on that.
Well, I read The Last Room on the Left by Lee Conan. This just came out last week from Putnam, new book. And it's a dark and twisty thriller. What drew me to this was it's set in a rural motel in the Catskills in winter, and there's a blizzard.
That's like, Chris, check, 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 check.
Right, totally. It's a woman named Carrie who's going up there because she's going to be a caretaker for a month. And she needs to have alone time and focus time and hopefully non-drinking time. Her life is really blown up lately. She is an alcoholic and her husband has left her. She's blown up things with her best friend. They're no longer talking. And she has had this big book deal, but she has to write the book. And also weighing on her shoulders is there's also a movie deal, but she has to write the book. And she is not having much success. So she thinks this will be great. I can go up there for a month and really knock out a lot of pages. Well, she gets there and then a snowstorm starts. And the next day she finds a dead body in the back of the motel.
As one does.
Exactly. So like I said, it's very twisty. It was a little slow start for me, but then once some things happened, I got sucked in and it was a page turner. And the funny thing is I don't want to give any spoilers or anything because it didn't go in some directions I anticipated. So I think there were some good red herrings that distracted me. But the motel is Instagram ready. It is not some dilapidated old place. It is an old place, but the new owners have really fixed it up. And they have looked for caretakers on Instagram. And some of it has to do with how they look and what their follower count is, stuff like that. So,
very of the moment.
Very of the moment. I've seen a couple reviews kind of take issue with the fact that it's considered a feminist version of The Shining, Stephen King's classic haunted hotel novel. I mean, the author says in her acknowledgments that somebody had said to her, writing a feminist version of The Shining would be cool. And I think you do have the motel/hotel setting in a blizzard, isolated, no way to get help, to get out. But the feminist aspect, I'm not really sure if you can consider this book feminist. It's really making me think about what is a feminist thriller? Because things happen to women in this book. And I don't know if just showing things that happen to women is enough to consider it a feminist novel. I don't know if there needs to be more unpacking of these things, but then does it just become dogmatic? It's really brought up a lot of thoughts for me. And I look forward to thinking about this idea as we go through our year of reading ghost stories. Now, this was not a ghost novel in any way, but the whole thing about what is a feminist novel, because we will be reading Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House.
Yeah.
Could that be considered a feminist novel? Anyway, The Last Room on the Left by Lee Cohen. This is not her first novel. And as I said, I've enjoyed it.
I read a book that I have to thank our librarian, Linda Johnson, for. When I talked about Trevor Noah's graphic novel, she emailed us and she said, well, have you read The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy? And I had not. So I went diligently to the library and got myself a copy, and am incredibly late to the party on this one because apparently it was a massive, massive success the year it came out. This copy, Chris, that I got from our local library has a really cool bookplate in it that says, donated in honor of Maureen O'Connor, which I thought was really sweet. Also, the author dedicates the book to his lovely, kind mum and his wonderful dog, Dill. So this is a really beautiful book. It's handwritten by the author in calligraphy style. It is a story about how to be kind to yourself and ask for help when you need it. It just has a really lovely theme, and it includes a boy and a mole that loves eating cake, and a horse and a fox, as the title suggests. The book is designed that you can open it on any page and read it. It's meaningful, but you also can read it as a story from the beginning to the end. And it has these beautiful sketches that also have watercolor painting in them. And I thought I'd just read one of the pages that really actually made me catch my breath. The picture is the boy riding the horse and the fox is right beside him. "What is the bravest thing you've ever said?" asked the boy. "Help," said the horse. And I was like, yeah, it's a really good point. Help is a really hard thing to ask for. And that's one of the things he talks about in this book. Then also how important it is. So then it says, "When have you been at your strongest?" asked the boy. "When I have dared to show my weakness." "Asking for help isn't giving up," said the horse. "It's refusing to give up," which I thought was a really lovely message. And then there's also this really sweet page, Chris, where there's just a drawing and a lot of stuff is kind of smudged on the drawing. And in very fine print at the bottom, it says, "My dog walked over the drawing, clearly trying to make the point." Because what it says on the page is, "The greatest illusion," said the mole, "is that life should be perfect." And then his dog walks across the page. It is a pure delight. I think everybody should own this book. It's lovely. The idea to me of reading it to my grandchildren or just having it on a coffee table that they could pick up eventually and read, I think is a great idea. When I was reading a little bit about the author, I did find out that there is an audiobook version that he narrates and there's music that someone wrote to go along with it. So I'm interested to get that. And then I learned that they made a movie about it that's on Apple TV. So that is something that is going to be upcoming for me to find. I cannot recommend this highly enough. Thank you, Linda Johnson. This was not on my radar. It was Barnes & Noble Book of the year it came out. I feel like I've never heard of it. The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy.
Nice. Well, my next book is a bloody vampire novel. So
seems like an appropriate segue.
Oh my gosh. So I read Lucy Undying by Kirsten White, and this is a fairly new book. It just came out last year. I saw somebody talking about it on one of the social media channels, and I was like, okay, that's what I want. It was supposedly a really good sapphic vampire novel, taking some of the characters from Bram Stoker's Dracula, which I feel like everyone knows. It's one of my favorite novels, if not my most favorite, if I had to choose one, right? And this is a story about a woman who is running from something, and you don't know what at the beginning. Her name is Iris. She's also an Emily Dickinson fan. Emily Dickinson pops up here and there. Not Emily Dickinson as a ghost, but her poetry. And the action kind of bounces around a little bit, but like from Salt Lake City to Paris and London and Whitby. Dracula fans know what that means. So she's inherited this old mansion in a neighborhood in London. And she's there to just kind of like sell off what she can for cash to make some quick money. She doesn't want to use credit cards or anything because, again, she's running from something. So she calls like a resale shop, antique store, and leaves a message saying, "I'm here. You're in the neighborhood. I would really love to get somebody over as soon as possible to assess what I can sell." And so a woman named Elle comes along, and she's going to help her assess things. The action of the story is told in 3 ways, and sometimes I do get a little tired of books that take place in different time periods and different modes of telling the story, but I really enjoyed this, even with some of the different time periods and places and modes of storytelling. The contemporary portion through Iris is told in the first person, her experience. And then the second mode is through a Boston therapist's client transcripts, which was interesting. And then the third way is through Lucy Westenra's journal from the 1890s, which was during the time period in which Dracula, that novel by Bram Stoker, is set. So you have these 3 ways of the story coming together and wondering what the hell is going on. I enjoyed it so much. A younger me would have hated this novel because the author takes the character of Lucy from Dracula and does things with her. And also Dracula and some of the other characters. I don't want to give any spoilers, so I'll stop mentioning character names there. I was a purist, and I would have wanted an extension of the story, not characters being very different or something. But I have to say, she's really made me think of Lucy, that character, in a different way. There's Mina, the brown-haired woman who gets shit done in Dracula, and then there's Lucy, who's the blonde who dies, but all the men love her and then stake her. Anyway. I don't want to get too bogged down in this, but I really loved thinking about the question of what is a feminist novel. I feel like this is a feminist take on Lucy in Dracula. So I'm curious now to reread Dracula. It's been a while since I have, and I might reread it this year. It did get a little bit bogged down toward the end, I have to say. I kind of feel like the conclusion took a long time. That's probably my biggest criticism. I mean, a criticism is not a bad word, but, you know, that kind of was the only thing I would say. So if you're not a Dracula purist, that little slowdown, I think most people can deal with. And some people might really like it, right? Some of the other themes include greed, biomedical engineering, and what does it mean to live a meaningful life in light of the constraints or the gifts one is given. So enjoyed it very much. I hope folks give it a shot because I do think it's a feminist novel because of some of the ways the author talks about things, but I'm not sure if that's because I've also read Dracula. So I think maybe those two things together, and maybe that's what makes things feminist, is to have some kind of juxtaposition that you are actually critiquing a structure of some kind. More to think about on that. So it's a diverse cast of characters, sapphic, queer. Check it out. Again, that is Lucy Undying by Kirsten White.
Maybe you need to read The Shining, and then you can compare whether that other one is actually a feminist retelling.
You know, I've had thoughts. I mean, I've read The Shining twice in different time periods of my life, like when I was in my 20s. Oh, no, I was a teenager when I read The Shining, right? I was in high school. Yeah.
That's amazing.
So I was a young teenager at that. And then I read it again when I was in my 40s. And I loved it both times, but for different reasons, because I understood different things that I learned in between those decades. So reading The Shining again in our year of ghosts, because that is involving ghosts and hauntings. The Shining.
More to come on that one. I finished The Love Elixir of Augusta Stern by Linda Cohen Loigman. I've been wanting to read a novel by her, and this is her most recent. I did also listen to the audiobook, which was narrated by Gabra Zachman. Augusta Stern has been lying about her age on her resume. Not that you really put your age on your resume, but she did things so people would think she was a little bit younger. It actually turns out her niece helped her do that. So she's been a devoted and hardworking pharmacist for years, and she's reaching retirement and is about to turn 80 and decides to retire and relocate down to Florida into a senior community where she happens to run into a man from her childhood who grew up in the same neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York in the 1920s. And where she grew up, her father was a pharmacist and kind of a revered person in the neighborhood that people went to for help and assistance. And her mother passed away from diabetes right before the advent of insulin. So her father, who was a pharmacist and couldn't help his own wife, kind of never recovers from that loss. And so to help raise Augusta and her sister, their great aunt Esther moves in with them. And along with her comes a mortar and pestle, a golden colored mortar and pestle that is inscribed with Hebrew letters. And she begins to help people in the neighborhood that the pharmacist father cannot, with elixirs, thus the title. And she helps people with problems of infertility and illness, and also problems of the heart. It is a really lovely novel. It reminds me a lot of The Secret Life of Albert Entwistle that I read. It was on my top 10 last year, just in that it's a later in life love story. It is very heterosexual, so it's not similar to Albert Entwistle in that way. But, you know, later in life romance where things were misinterpreted in their youth or just missed opportunities. It was very feel-good. It was one of the first novels I read in 2025, and it was perfect. Again, it's called The Love Elixir of Augusta Stern by Linda Cohen Loigman. And it has a lot of aunt and niece love, which I really appreciated.
That's cool. It actually made me think of Alice Hoffman's Practical Magic series. It made me think a little bit about that when you were talking about
There's
elixirs.
Definitely some people would say it's not magical realism, that, she just was very good with herbs and things like that, which is very much a part of the Practical Magic series. So I wouldn't say that it had magical realism, but it did have that, I'm saying this in air quotes, witchy feeling of someone who could help people with herbs and elixirs.
Listeners, if you're new to us, we usually don't talk about quite so many books that we just read, but it's been several weeks since we actually recorded an episode. And there are some things we're leaving off, but we're talking about what we've been excited about, even though maybe we're not giving everything a big glowing review, because here at the Book Cougars, we do try to give an honest reaction to the books that we read. And we tend to not read books that we don't really like or finish them, right? Mm-hmm. So this is one that I finished and I absolutely loved. It's a book I found late last year at Bank Square Books at their new location when we went there for a browse. Militia House by John Milas. It's about a haunted barracks in Afghanistan. And I found it in their horror section. It intrigued me. And I saw the Militia House and I was like, oh, militia in the horror section. That sounds interesting. And then I pulled the cover, which I'm holding up to Emily right now, and there are helicopters in an oval around the title of the book, but they're facing different directions, belly to belly or blades to blades kind of thing. So they also kind of look like bugs.
They do.
Yeah. Isn't that cool?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I didn't get that until I was reading it. This is a story about a Marine Corps corporal who's in Afghanistan. He is in logistics. So he's in charge of a small squad who is at this forward area during the transition of the British leaving and the Americans coming to take over this section. So it's just a small group. They're there to unload and load helicopters that are taking things away and bringing supplies in before the whole unit comes in. When you're in a war zone, I've never been in a war zone. I wasn't deployed that way when I served, but everywhere you are, you have fire watch, where you walk a perimeter or do guard duty for 2 hours. It's just something that you do. And so when he has fire watch, he's with another guy, and he notices this building off in the distance outside of the wire, outside of their zone. And he just is intrigued by it and keeps thinking about it and looking at it. So before the British soldiers leave, he gets their head guy to take his squad outside of the line to go down into this barracks. So they go into the barracks. It's noticeable that the British do not go in. They stay outside. And they go into this haunted barracks that is left over from the Russians from the 80s when they were in Afghanistan. And they come out and nothing is the same. It is a very creepy book. There's a lot of suspense and anticipation. I loved his writing. His writing is really crisp and clear. It flows so well. Like, even when he was writing about boredom, I just could keep reading. I just loved his prose so much. And then I noticed when I finished the book and was looking at reviews on Goodreads, Roxane Gay gave this 5 stars. And he was one of her students who wrote an early draft of this novel in one of her classes. She blurbs it on the front saying, "An extraordinary novel about the quiet and not so quiet horrors of war." And then on the back, this is just from the publisher, they're saying like Stephen King meets Tim O'Brien.
Oh, interesting.
And that's a really good comparison. Mm-hmm. So, this is a good one. It dragged a little bit for me towards the end, and I don't know if that's I'm beginning to feel a theme in my reading so far for 2025. It could be the book, it could be me, it could be what was going on that was painful for me to read. I'm not sure, but I highly recommend this book, The Militia House. Couldn't put it down. Just a little bit of a content warning, though. There is a dog who's been injured by porcupine quills. He's a stray dog. He's in a few scenes. And when that came up early in the book, I was like, I don't know. But you don't really see anything more about the dog. But I just want to put that out there for those of you who don't want to go there at all. As far as I know, the dog isn't harmed anymore in any other way. And then sometimes you got to wonder, what's real? Because it's a ghost story. I do want to talk to somebody who's read this book. So if you have, let us know. Again, that's The Militia House by John Miles. He is an author. I will read his next book for sure.
I finished a novel called Heartwood by Amity Gage. This comes out on April 1st. Thank you to Simon & Schuster and NetGalley for the early advanced reader copy. Amity Gage is the author of Sea Wife. And I looked all through our show notes and couldn't figure it out, but I know that at one point that is a novel that Anne Kingman recommended. Maybe there was one episode that Michael Kindness and Anne Kingman, for those of you who don't know, they were the co-hosts of Books on the Nightstand, which is a podcast that has long ago sunset. But during the pandemic, they did like a one episode. I think it might have even been on YouTube. I don't remember. Maybe that's where she mentioned that novel. Anyway, I never got to Sea Wife, but when I saw that Amity Gage had a new novel, I hopped on it. And it is about Valerie Gillis, who's a 42-year-old, and she's been hiking on the Appalachian Trail. And she's reaching the last 200 miles, which take place in Maine, which I learned from reading this novel are some of the most difficult miles of the entire Appalachian Trail. And she goes missing. And in steps a great character by the name of Beverly, and she's the Maine state game warden that gets put in charge of leading the search and rescue team, the on-the-ground search and rescue team. And then another character that comes in is Lena, who's a 76-year-old bird-watching woman who lives in a senior living facility in Connecticut. And she becomes an armchair detective character in the novel. It's super suspenseful because the game warden character, Beverly, they start ticking down the chapters by the number of days that the woman has been missing as they bring huge numbers of people in to try to search for her. But part of what makes these last 200 miles of the trail difficult is that there's the path that you walk on the trail, and then right on either side of the path, it's heavily wooded. So it's hard for someone to go missing and hard to then look for them. And so you feel the countdown is on, but at the same time, the woman, Valerie, you know she's alive because she is a character in the novel. So it's suspenseful, but also you know things that Beverly, the game warden, doesn't know. I don't want to give any spoilers. There is another aspect of the novel where Valerie, who's the hiker, is writing letters to her mother. So there's an epistolary component to the novel, which is something I really like. It was very good. It was an absolute page turner for me. I highly recommend it. It did make me want to go check out Sea Wife. I don't remember what that novel was about, but I remember Anne Kingman really praising it. So put this one on your pre-orders. Tell your libraries about it. Heartwood by Amity Gage, coming out in April.
Nice. Well, I read a classic, A Sun at the Front by Edith Wharton, which is not one of her novels that I had even heard of before. Age of Innocence, The House of Mirth, they're just so popular. This is a novel. It was first published in 1923. I read a new edition that just came out in 2023, an Oxford World's Classic Edition. They had the introduction and notes by Julie Olin Amantorp, who was a big Wharton scholar. She's past president of the Wharton Society and everything. She's also a big Willa Cather scholar, which is interesting, and wrote a book about both of them. I have to say, this is a World War I novel, unlike any I've ever read. It's about the parents, particularly the father, of a son who goes to fight in World War I. Most of the World War I novels I've read are about the soldier, somebody who's more involved with it there. But this is a story of a guy named John Compton, who is now in his late 50s. He's a famous portrait painter in Paris. He's an American who was born in Paris by accident, and his son goes back to Paris to study art and everything. His son is born in Paris too. So because of that, even though they're technically Americans, the son has to go fight for the French. He also had served his military time before he went off to college at Harvard. So the son is coming back. World War I has not broken out yet. So the father is all excited that his son is coming home back to Paris from Harvard, and they're going to have this summer-long trip. before he goes to start working at his stepfather's bank. Because to backtrack a little bit, John Campton is divorced from his wife, the son's mother. She has remarried a wealthy American banker. So it's also an early look at family dynamics in a family where there's been divorce. And that is pretty early, 1923. So poor John, he doesn't get that time with his son because the son comes home and the next day or so the war breaks out. But leading up to that, there's all this speculation if the war is going to break out or what's going to happen. He's not a great man, John Campton. He's a bit selfish. He's a painter who is supposed to see things, but he really doesn't see what's before him because he is so like all of us. He sees what he sees through his filters, and he really is stubborn in a lot of ways. Like, one of the reasons they're divorced is that early on in their marriage, when the son, whose name is George, is just a baby, they're in Spain somewhere, and John sees a scene from the train and says, oh, I have to go back and paint that, and is just going to be gone a couple days. And a month later, he's not back, so the wife divorces him. You kind of get an idea of what kind of guy he is, right? To just abandon his wife and baby like that for a month. So, as I said, not a great character, and he is the point of view character. You get everything through his eyes. And some of the peripheral characters are just fascinating, like the ex-wife and the new husband, who do so much for the son and also in a way for John Campton. As one of the other characters says, like, he couldn't have been who he was, who he became, his real self, this great painter, without his ex-wife's husband's money and the new husband being there to take care of the child and to pay for everything while he's off doing his painting, right? So it's a hard novel. I read it with Sean of Sean Breed's books and Dorian and James. We did a buddy read of this one, and that video will be on Sean's channel probably in the spring sometime. I was the only one who at first said I didn't like it. And it's definitely not my favorite Edith Wharton. I think it's a fantastic novel. It's brilliant in some ways, and I really admire it a lot. But I don't think it's one I would reread again for pleasure. But it's a great look at actually what Paris was like for civilians during World War I. Edith Wharton lived there at that time, and she did a lot of work to help refugees and injured soldiers and the people who were just suffering because of things like food shortages and coal shortages. Edith Wharton, she's just such a fantastic writer. And I realize that John Campton, is not meant to be somebody you necessarily like, right? Mm-hmm. And so I don't usually need to like a character. I need to care about a character. And I really didn't care about him, but I cared about these other characters. And at one point I wish, like, man, I'd like to read a novel from their point of view. Like, what do they think of him?
Interesting.
Yeah. One of the reasons we haven't heard about A Sun at the Front by Edith Wharton is because some of the literary criticism, Julie Olin Amantorp talks about this in her introduction, is that the impact of some of the literary criticism that set up what would be considered a World War I novel was that it would have frontline action, irony, and be modernist. This novel isn't that. So I don't think people knew really what to do with this novel because it is more of a family father-son novel than that frontline thing. And it made me think about the Willa Cather connection with her book, One of Ours, which is a World War I novel as well that also kind of got panned by the critics because it's not ironic. I really enjoyed this one, A Sun at the Front. It's growing on me the more I think about it and the more I talk about it. Some of the themes are responsibility, duty, art, what happens in society when things break down, father-son relationships, obviously, and then, that new husband relationship when you're the ex-husband. Quite fascinating.
I wonder if he ever painted the ex-husband. If the ex-husband ever painted the new husband, I mean.
That's interesting. I don't think he mentions that, but one of the points of conflict between the men is that one of John Campton's famous paintings is a portrait of his son, George, and the new husband wants to buy it. And John is like, never. And he makes it so that that could never happen. It's hung in a museum now. But there's one scene when John is trying to help a family of a soldier who's been killed by selling one of his sketches. You know, like I said, he's famous now, and he's shocked by the amount of money he can get for this sketch, which is a workup of that portrait. And before he hands it over, he's like, wait, who are these buyers that you're talking about who want to buy me? And he's like, oh, it's an American woman. And he's like, okay, you know, because he just doesn't want it to go to the ex-husband because there's such tension. And one of John's laments is like he wants one-on-one time with his son. And he's so jealous of having to share his son. So, I mean, again, I as I'm saying these things, I'm like, I like it. I like it more than I thought I did.
Well, sometimes you have to talk about a book, especially with other people, and then just sleep on it, like we've said, you know, and really think about it.
Yeah. Yes. If you're interested in World War I, if you're an Edith Wharton fan, I would definitely recommend this book. Again, A Sun at the Front by Edith Wharton.
I finished What Are You Going Through by Sigrid Nunez, and I also listened to the audiobook narrated by Hilary Huber. This starts with a quote. The love of our neighbor in all its fullness simply means being able to say to him, "What are you going through?" by Simone Weil. And so that was Sigrid Nunez's idea for why she wanted to title the book, What Are You Going Through? But there's no question mark on her title. I saw an interview with her where she said to her, we should all care about what people are going through. It's just a fact. It's a book in what she calls a trilogy, but they're all standalone books. And I learned that when I went to hear her talk about The Vulnerables last year. I think it was last year at Bank Square Books. The first book is The Friend, which she won the National Book Award for. And then there's this one, What Are You Going Through? And then The Vulnerables. And they're all told from the perspective of this unnamed narrator that's in her 70s. In this novel, an old friend gets in touch with the narrator. They were friends back in their earlier years and have lost touch. And the friend is going through cancer treatments. And she's already been through a round and it's not looking good. And she's decided she wants to end her life. She has means to do that, but she asks her friend to join her in her final days to kind of help take care of her and just be a companion, really. That's what the novel's about. But then there's also, they're not interstitials. Remember when you talked about that concept of interstitials where there might be a newspaper article or something like that? But I guess they're observations. There'll be a chapter that talks about her ex-husband. There was one about a cat, a stray cat, that was so sad and poignant. And also I was kind of like, what's that doing here? There were some random things, but it's all about things trying to get along. What are you going through? Whether you're a cat or her ex-husband. Also, the woman who's dying of cancer does not have a good relationship with her own daughter. And it's interesting to see how that is handled and judged by others, not by this unnamed narrator at all, but other people who can't believe, like, you're dying of cancer. Of course your daughter's going to help you, you know, that sort of thing. Sigrid Nunez is just very observational in her writing, and it's a slim novel, really short, and I enjoyed both reading it and listening to the audiobook. She brings up some really interesting concepts. I also marked a little passage that she said, it's not a passage, it's just in the writing of the novel. Henry James said that there are two kinds of people in the world. Those who, upon seeing someone else suffering, think, that could happen to me, and those who think, that will never happen to me. The first kind of people help us to endure. The second kind make life hell. And I think part of what she's also really taking on in this novel is the concept of death and people's discomfort about talking about it, and also what you do when someone's decided they're ready to die because of the suffering they're going through. Again, it's called What Are You Going Through by Sigrid Nunez.
Did they make that into a movie?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Because I was going to say, it sounds like a movie that I've just been hearing a lot about lately.
It's a movie that I read this novel because I found out this new movie with Tilda Swinton and Julianne Moore called The Room Next Door, directed by Pedro Almodovar, who's one of my favorite directors, is based on this novel by Sigrid Nunez, which I had no idea. And so I read the novel in preparation for going to see the movie, which I went to do the other day and was a total bust because the movie theater had listed the movie times incorrectly. So that is an upcoming jaunt for me. Yes. I'm very curious to see the movie and how this novel is made into a movie. So Biblio Adventures. I just said that I tried to go see The Room Next Door based on the novel by Sigrid Nunez, and that was a bust. So I was so bummed. I came home and decided to watch a movie, and for some reason decided to watch The Devil Wears Prada, based on the novel by Lauren Weisberger. I had seen it years and years ago, and it was a delight. It held up for me.
Yeah, that's a great movie. Yes. I love that one. Nice. Well, speaking of movies, I also went to a movie to see Nosferatu, which is a remake of a silent film, which was based on Bram Stoker's Dracula, loosely. But this Nosferatu, you've probably seen advertisements for it. It's one of the big movies of the season. And I went with my friend Jennifer, and we're both kind of chickens. So we did an afternoon show. So
well, even that'll get you out in the dark this time of year.
I know, but it was still only like 4 or 5, I think. You know what? It's a beautiful film. The cinematography, the costumes, the setting was really fantastic. But the storyline, I thought, needed some development because you really don't know what's going on unless that's what the creators wanted. But I kind of feel not. I feel like it could have been a stronger movie if the storyline had been attended to a little bit better. But beautiful, beautiful film. We laughed in places where I don't think we were supposed to laugh. So it wasn't actually all that scary for us as Dracula aficionados and vampire fans. But I did enjoy the experience of seeing it. I mean, at one point, Jennifer even said, "Oh, come on." And that was a big surprise for us.
Yeah. Well, I listened to an interview via the American Writers Museum in Chicago with Sigrid Nunez and the author Charlotte Wood talking about Sigrid's novel, What Are You Going Through? And Charlotte Wood is the author of The Weekend, which I talked about, I don't know, in the later part of 2024. And she also wrote Stoneyard Devotional, which is a book that I really want to get to this year. But it was a really interesting conversation. And Sigrid Nunez talked a lot about the craft of writing. And one thing she talked about is that she writes in a very linear fashion and starts at the beginning of the story and just writes all the way through it. There was a Q&A at the end. I can't remember where this question came from. Asked if, because Sigrid Nunez is such an observational writer, if she takes a lot of notes, like when she's out in public, is she eavesdropping and taking notes? And she said she does eavesdrop, but she's not a note taker. And she said mostly that's because she's lazy. She wants to just be enjoying herself when she's out gallivanting. But she said she does have a really good memory, and that serves her well when she's writing. And then she was just funny because she's a teacher. She teaches writing. And one person asked a question, do you read your dialogue out loud? And she said, oh, I tell my students all the time that's a really good idea and you should do that. But I'm just lazy and I don't, which I thought was really sweet. It's a really lovely conversation. It's a video and it's available online. So I'll put a link in the show notes to that.
Nice. Well, I was in Chicago, Northern Illinois, visiting, and I had a couple Biblio adventures there. One is my mom and I went to this antique/estate/resale shop near her, and we were browsing the books. She wanted to go there because she's like, you got to see the amount of books that they have. They have a ton of books, and she had purchased them there in the past for like $1, So we went and we had a really good browse, and I didn't see anything I was going to get, but I did see a hardcover copy of Envy by Sandra Brown. And I was like, oh, Mom, like we just read that on the Book Cougars, this year. And she's like, oh, really? And I was like, I think you might like it because it's a good 90s book. And so she bought it and she started reading it and was liking it. That was cool. I also got to meet up with Colleen, one of our listeners and somebody who's been on the podcast a couple times in the past. We met up in Naperville, Illinois, and had a browse at Anderson's bookstore, which had an event going on when we were there. We were there in the afternoon on a weekend, and I meant to look up the author before we sat down to record, and I totally forgot. But I did pick up a book when I was there, Woodworm by Leila Martinez. It's translated by Sophie Hughes and Annie McDermott. Martinez is a writer from Spain, so they translated it from Spanish. And I was looking at their horror section because ghosts are on my mind. So I thought, let me scope that out. I actually found Woodworm in their general fiction section. So it was originally published in Spain in 2021 under the title Carcoma, which is woodworm in Spanish. I know a Spanish word now, another one. Let me read the book's description. The house breathes. The house holds bodies and secrets. The house is visited by ghosts, by angels that line the roof like insects, and by saints that burn the bed sheets with their halos. Built long ago by a small-time hustler to control his wife, the house won't let their daughter and her granddaughter leave. When the mysterious disappearance of a boy draws unwanted attention, these two shut-ins, are they witches or are they simply enraged? Combine forces with the spirits that haunt them in pursuit of something that resembles justice. In this lush translation by Sophie Hughes and Annie McDermott, Leila Martinez's eerie debut novel is a class-conscious horror that drags generations of monsters into the sun.
Oh my gracious. And it's got like a lobster climbing out the front of it.
I know. It's like there are different covers online that I've seen. Yeah, so it's a house that has a bird on top, a couple pictures that looks like maybe the Virgin Mary or some saints, a lobster, and a praying mantis. Sounds wild, but this is in the general fiction section and not horror. And I'm always fascinated by that, where bookstores place books, how publishers promote books. And it brought to mind issues where people poo-poo horror. A publisher or a bookstore wants to promote something as being more literary, right? I'm going to combine this conversation with the current issue of O Reader magazine, issue 18. And there was an article in this most recent issue, Don't Ride the Horror Elevator, by Harley Carnell. And it writes against this idea of, quote, elevated horror, that regular horror is put down and it's not considered literary. It's not considered worthy. It's considered junk and trash that's not worthy of serious writers' attention or even academics necessarily. He makes a point that Gothic literature is what's studied by academics, not horror literature, right? It's a great point. And then I happened to read an obituary by a writer who passed away recently, Andrew Piper. He's a Canadian writer, and his work is horror, but the obituary writer referred to his writing as smart horror.
Oh, interesting.
So, I'm just really kind of tuned into this because in the past, I feel like I've missed out on books because they were not in the right section. Mm-hmm. Or, people who want to read a really good story don't find it because they're used to looking in this section or that section. So I think that's going to be something to keep an eye on as we read ghost stories and how people talk about them, because they are a classic literary genre in and of themselves. And I understand that horror is a big umbrella and that sometimes people think of slasher or vampires. We all have our internal hierarchies, I suppose. So anyway, that was a really fun browse, and it was great to see Colleen.
Yes, I was envious of you guys that day. I knew you were together. Well, the gentleman caller and I were able to watch a show together, which is always a victory for me. And it was American Primeval on Netflix. It's a 6-part series. It just came out recently, I think. And it's written by Mark Smith, who wrote The Revenant. So if you've read The Revenant or seen the movie, you know that it's quite dark. He's not afraid to write about dark things. And this is directed by Peter Berg. For any of you Friday Night Lights fans, he's the one who directed that series, which I adored. And American Primeval stars Taylor Kitsch, who was in Friday Night Lights. It spans just a short time period in the 1850s with a woman who is traversing from Philadelphia with her young son and trying to get to Utah. It covers the Bridger frontier and Mormons and fighting for land ownership during that time. It is bloody. I had to turn my head quite often, but I really was intrigued by the story, and we totally binged it in 2 days, which was not the gentleman caller's choice, but it was my choice. I told him I have no self-control when this story gets its claws into me, and that's what happened with this one. So again, it's called American Primeval, and it's on Netflix now.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So I also had a Biblio adventure that was a Zoom conversation when I was in Chicago with a group of readers who are reading all 12 of Cather's novels this year, spearheaded by Colleen, who started this. So we discussed Cather's first novel, Alexander's Bridge, which was published in 1912, I believe. And that was a very good conversation. And it's a novel I've read several times before, and I've read about it. And I think it was Lizzie in the conversation brought up a Great Gatsby connection with this novel. It's about a man he's a bridge builder and engineer, very famous, very much sought after, who's building this huge bridge in Canada. And he's middle-aged, he's early middle-aged and starting to feel it and has an affair. And he's one of those guys who everyone has always praised him and loved him and adored him, and things have come easy to him, and he's big and masculine with a big square head and all these things, and he wants it all, that kind of thing, even though it's not that blatant necessarily. But he's torn between these two women. He's starting to lower his standards a little bit just to get things done, because, he has to answer to the people who are funding these bridges. So anyway, the connection to Great Gatsby being like that you want it all, even though thinking that you can get it all is really delusional. And then that made me think about how F. Scott Fitzgerald read Cather and really admired her. And he even wrote her a fan letter one time about A Lost Lady, her subsequent novel, apologizing if he'd plagiarized it all. So that was a fun connection. I love talking about books.
And yes. Colleen has a schedule for this read along. It's on her Instagram handle, which we'll put in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll put a link to that. And so up next in February is O Pioneers. And just one more thing about Alexander's Bridge. It's set in America and then also in England, London, and I didn't know this. There's some scenes in a museum, and I did not know that Victorians ate pieces of mummy back in the late 19th century, early 20th century. Had you ever heard of that?
No, I can't say that I have.
Yeah, so another surprising thing that I learned. So thanks, Colleen, and everybody who's part of that group. You're welcome. Anybody, you can drop in for one book or read all of them. Whatever you'd like to do, just connect with Colleen. She'll get you set up.
Well, we had a fantastic joint jaunt, which we haven't done in what feels like a year, but I know it hasn't been a year. But we both kind of suffered from the plague at the beginning of the year and have just been busy. And yesterday we got the opportunity to jump in the car together and head to Providence, Rhode Island.
Yes, we went to the Providence Athenaeum, or Athenaeum. You can pronounce it either way.
We learned they actually had a sign when you entered that said both pronunciations are correct, which we had been discussing on the drive up, actually.
Yes.
So it was nice to know that you can do it either way.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That library has been on my bucket list for a long time. It opened in the early 1800s.
Yeah, I think it was like 1830s, wasn't it?
Yeah. Very early. And they've been around for this long. Really neat architecture. Creaky floors in some sections, a lot of busts of famous writers.
We were very excited to run into Edgar Allan Poe, being that it's our year of the ghost story.
Yes, he is there, and he was there himself as a visitor in
Yes.
Rhode Island in September of 1848. And he was there specifically to meet Sarah Helen Whitman, who was a wealthy Rhode Island widow he was hoping to woo.
Yes. And he proposed to her and she said, no, thank you.
Yes. But she was a big member of the Providence Athenaeum. And so he went there. He was there and they have his bust there. And they also sell postcards with Poe.
And it was interesting to me that there was a very big children's section, which we've been to several of these Athenaeums now, and I don't remember ever seeing one that was so big and had room for kids to hang out. When I walked through, there was a family there and kids sitting on the floor reading books. They had quite a schedule of kids' activities, so that was fun to see.
Yeah, it's a real, the Athenaeum is right next to Brown University. So they must have a lot of young families that live in the area and that need access to kids' books. And what a great way. This is a membership library where you pay to become a member. It's not a public library. So it's a great way to keep themselves in action for what their members need, and having kids' books and kids' programming.
And there were a lot of current reads available for adults and then older books in the stacks.
Yeah, it was really fun to browse the older books.
And then there was a downstairs that we went to, and they had big, beautiful wooden tables, and we spent the day working there, which was really fun.
Yeah, we worked down there. That's where they have periodicals, and the restroom is down there, and that was really nice. And then, so there's that downstairs, the main floor, and then there's an upper level where they have stacks that are open to the main part of that first floor with a desk facing the railing. And those are reserved for members of the library, those desks that are on the second floor. But walking around, it's amazing to think, and I still get goosebumps when I walk in a place where I know that somebody like Edgar Allan Poe walked.
Yep.
Because you just think about the longevity of some of the cultural institutions in places that are here in America. And I know if there are any Europeans listening, you're laughing because you're thinking like 1830,
right.
That's a drop in the bucket, honey, But, for us, and then for American literary history buffs, it's really exciting to walk where some of these people have walked.
Yes, indeed. And it's in a really beautiful neighborhood, kind of hilly. And afterward, we walked around Brown campus. It was quite chilly. It was probably 10 degrees
oh my gosh,
when we were doing
so cold,
this.
Yes.
And it was just dusk, but we wanted to just take a little walk before getting back in the car and sitting some more to drive home. It was such a nice day.
Yeah, definitely such a nice day. And we did pop into Rockefeller Library. That's part of Brown. That kind of is like back to back with the Athenaeum.
Yeah.
And we just kind of popped in there, and somebody had put all of their poems into a little booklet and had them laying there for people to take, which I thought that's quite smart.
Yeah, with a little sign that said, "Take me."
Take me, yeah.
So, Chris, do you have any upcoming jaunts?
I do. On January 28th, I am signed up for the Woman's Prize Book Club with Sarah Waters. She's going to be in conversation with Simon Savage. They're going to be discussing her novel, Fingersmith, which is one I just recently read, with Sean of Sean Breed's Books. And so we recorded our buddy read discussion, and then we're going to record again after we attend this event to see if their conversation sparks something that we want to talk about. I'm super looking forward to that. Now, this is an event that's live in England, but they're also streaming it. You do pay for this. It's not that expensive. I don't remember what it costs, but it's not that expensive to stream. And then I believe you have access to it for 30 days, which is great because I won't be able to attend the live portion. I'll be working.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah. So that is something I'm definitely looking forward to.
And we'll put a link to that in the show notes. I'm signed up, I think you are too, for a virtual event through Yale with Ruth Franklin talking about her new book, The Many Lives of Anne Frank. And that too is a virtual event you could sign up for. So we'll put a link to that in the show notes, and it's free.
Yeah, and that's going to be a busy day for us because we're both also signed up to attend an in-person event at the New York Society Library on February 5th at 6 p.m. This is going to be a presentation by the New Relic Theater of Lord Byron's Manfred, which is in part a ghost story. So we thought that would be really appropriate and fun to go. We'd love the New York Society Library, and to see a classic work performed, I think is going to be pretty exciting.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what we think we might go down. It's also a recording day, so it's going to be a full day, probably spent in New York City all day, so that'll be fun. I'm also signed up on February 12th through R.J. Julia's in Madison, Connecticut, to hear Charmaine Wilkerson in conversation with Kristen Higgins about Charmaine's new novel, Good Dirt. She was the author of Black Cake, which is a novel I really enjoyed that I think was made into a serialized television show. But I keep calling this Good Cake, this new book. I keep combining the names. But the new novel is called Good Dirt, and it pubs on January 28th. So this event is just a couple of weeks after pub day.
So Good Dirt, American Dirt, you just talked about Janine Cummins' new book. And our last Biblio adventure that we went to in person prior to the pandemic was her event at RJ Julia for American Dirt.
It was. And remember, Aunt Ellen took the train up and we all went together and we were crammed in there.
Like sardines, yes.
Yeah, that's so funny. Yep.
Dirt. So what about upcoming reads?
Well, Good Dirt is one of them. I do have the Ark, so I'm going to try to dip into that. And then The Haunting of Hill House. And I do want to dip into The Many Lives of Anne Frank by Ruth Franklin. We have a copy of that as well. What about you?
Well, yeah, The Haunting of Hill House. I'm looking forward to that very much. And also O Pioneers by Cather, which is the first novel of hers I ever read. So it always has a special place in my heart. And I'll be starting Swan's Way by Proust with Robin from Sacramento. She has a group of folks who are doing the Proust Pilot Project. That's the official hashtag if you want to look on Instagram. She has the schedule made out for us. I've never read anything by him, so I'm really looking forward to it. And this is, a novelization of his life that's, I think, 7 novels long. So Swan's Way is the first part. And I don't know if I'll just be doing the first part. Again, it's the pilot project, right? So, yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And then, when I was sitting down to pick my next book, I was torn between Alice Henderson's new book, which is an e-arc. It's on my e-reader, and The Gray Wolf by Louise Penny, which I have the hardcover copy. I was torn between both of them because, it's Louise Penny. But yeah. I went with Alice Henderson because of the ease of reading an e-book. So, Lorraine, this is for you to let you know that I will be reading The Gray Wolf before our next episode.
And the reason we're shouting out Lorraine is because we got a most wonderful email from Lorraine. We love to get email. You can email us at bookcougars@gmail.com. The subject started like this: Happy New Year. And then it says, looking forward to a wonderful year of reading with you. I am not sure if I have missed any episodes, but I am anxiously awaiting Chris to talk about Louise Penny Gray Wolf. What is going on? It has been out for months and I haven't heard a word from Chris. I'd like to know what you think. Thank you for the nudge, Lorraine.
Yeah, thank you, Lorraine. Now, for those of you who don't know, usually on a Louise Penny publication day, it is International Louise Penny Day for me. Like, I would take the day off, I would go and get the book, and I would spend the day reading. And that just didn't happen this last year. Because that was
in the fall, right? I mean, isn't it like October or something?
Something October, November. Yeah, and I'm just like, oh my God. Colleen and I even talked about it because she's read it. And I was like, oh my God, I haven't read it yet. I need to get on it. Because they've already announced her next book coming out in 2025, which will be The Black Wolf. So I do need to get on it. And Lorraine, thank you so much. I just wanted you to know that is on my radar. You haven't missed an episode.
Chop, chop, Chris. Let's go. Well, we always want to know what you're reading. Find us on our social media platforms. Like we said, email us. Reminder about the Haunting of Hill House read-along on February 16th. And also, if you've been thinking about becoming a Patreon and you aren't yet, we are continuing our fourth Sunday of the month reading salons at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And if you become a Patreon at the $5 level or above, you are welcome to join us for those monthly salons.
Yeah, so much fun. I mean, that's something we just started last year, and we didn't know what to expect, and it's just been a great time talking with listeners about books.
Because as you can tell by this episode, we love talking about books.
All right, everybody. Happy reading. Thanks for listening to The Book Cougars with Chris Wallach and Emily Fine. We'll be back again with another episode in 2 weeks. Until then, come chat with us on social media, Goodreads, or email us at bookcougars@gmail.com. If you'd like to help support our podcast, please tell others about us, leave a review wherever you listen, and consider becoming a patron. Even $1 a month is a big help. Learn more about that on our website, bookcougars.com, where you'll find the show notes for this and all of our past episodes.
Thanks, everybody.
This episode was edited by Pat Keogh Sound Design.